My name's Nell Warner. I'm a researcher in CASCADE, which is, for those of you, if any of you don't know it, it's the Children's Social Care Research Centre in Cardiff University. And we do a whole range of different types of projects to do with children's social care using different methods. And quite a number of them now are either have a sale element to them. So I'm going to be doing an overview of the projects that I'm kind of leading in terms of sale, but there are some other projects going on within Cascade that are also interesting. So what I'm going to do is it's a very brief overview of the current of the work that I've finished, and also a very brief overview of my current work. So previous research, it's one sale project that I finished last in 2024, early 2024, which was looking at the risk factors in the households of children who go into care, so particularly in the adults, so their parents and other adults in those households. And then there's two current projects, which are about children returning home from care and also children who leave care because they receive a special guardianship order. So that's why I've called the overall presentation Entering and Leaving Care. So one project about entering care and two about leaving. So first of all, the first project that I'm going to talk about is this project about the households of children entering care. Now, there's many factors that those working in social care and social care research are already aware are risk factors for children entering care. And those are particular issues in parents that are particularly common. So things like substance misuse, mental health problems, domestic abuse, and parental learning disabilities are all very commonly known to be associated with a greater likelihood of children entering care. So this study looked at some of those things, but in terms of what I was able to easily find within SAIL. So I was very lucky to have Anne John's team providing some support to this project. So we had some good, it was easy to get some good codes on for some of the mental health issues, but the specific things I looked at were drug misuse and alcohol misuse, all various different types of mental health problems listed there: depression, anxiety, bipolar, schizophrenia, other types of psychotic disorders, eating disorders, self-harm. I looked at the codes for domestic abuse, and in the end decided we were worried about the quality of some of the domestic abuse codes, and so we decided to use assault that had happened at home, so people presenting in A&E who had been the victim of assault that had taken place in their home as a sort of proxy, though it's quite a different issue. We also looked at parental learning disabilities, and then three types of kind of neurodivergent issues in the adults in those households. So learning difficulties, which were cognitive things like dyslexia and dyspraxia, autistic spectrum disorders, and ADHD. So there was an interest in finding out how much these were associated with the likelihood of children going into care, but we kind of knew they probably would be on the whole, but it was much more about the circumstances in which these risks had an impact and how they could really explain some of the other effects we see within the likelihood of children going into social care. So we looked at who has the risk, so which member of the household, biological mothers, other adults. As you probably well know, it's not hard to it's not easy to identify fathers in SAIL, but other adults, other male adults, and other female adults. We looked at the impacts of having multiple risk factors as opposed to having one or having no risks, whether there was a protective impact of somebody with no risks. We looked at the interrelationship, well, I'm calling it poverty, but the interrelationship with area level deprivation and with free school meal eligibility. We looked at the variations across local authorities. There's quite a lot of variations in the number of children entering care from different local authorities. We're looking at how these differences in prevalence of these issues could explain that. Also, the interrelationship between these things and child characteristics, so the interrelationship with ethnicity and the child's age and different issues, and also whether these changes in these things or the impact that these things were having could account for any of the changes in the numbers of children entering care since, well, in this case, since 2008. There have been huge increases in the number of children entering care actually since the 1990s. So we wanted to see whether any of this could explain any of that. So far, I've had a paper published on the first bit. We've had a paper published on the first bit, and in some of this bit to do with ethnicity. There's a couple of other papers that are in at the moment being reviewed, and I'm trying to write a paper from the last bit. I'm just going to very briefly explain what we did. We used the Welsh Index of Multiple Deprivation to create a data set of households with children aged 3 to 17 in. We hadn't initially wanted it to be just children aged 3 to 17, but as many of you may know, there have been certainly historically and still some ongoing problems with the quality of ALFs in the looked after children data, or identifying ALFs in the looked after children data. And at the point we were doing the study, the quality for the 0 to 2-year-olds was really poor. So we decided to just focus on this older age group. We looked at, that was then linked to the looked after children data to identify which of these households had had a child entering care, at least one child. We linked it to the birth data to look for biological mothers, and to all these different health data sets to identify all those risk factors that I explained on the page before. Also linked it to education data for some parts of the study. That was to find free school meal status and some ethnicity in the comparison population. We ended up with a data set with about 290,000 households, and about 2,700 of those had one or more children enter care. So I don't have time to go into the details of all the findings, but I'm just going to show you a very brief overview of a couple of them. This is a forest plot, a bit like Jean's just showed in the last study, of a regression model looking at the impact of these risk factors in on the likelihood of a household having one or more child enter care. This was it's a binary regression, logistic regression model, and it had included, we'd also controlled for area level deprivation and the number of adults in the household. And this shows you the impact that each of these risk factors in the adults, any adult in the household having a risk factor, had on the likelihood of the child going into care. So you can see that the further to the right they are, the bigger impact. So drug misuse and a parent having been a victim of assault that had taken place at home were having the biggest impact on the likelihood of a child being taken into care. Quite a lot of the others had a significant impact. Some of the mental health issues, particularly bipolar and other psychotic disorders, didn't have an impact when everything else was controlled for. So they did when things weren't controlled for. So bipolar, if you just did a bivariate analysis with just bipolar and the likelihood of care, it does have an impact. But once you controlled for all these other issues in the household, that was no longer significant in this data. And so autism in the adults in the household was not related to the likelihood of care in these models once we'd controlled for everything else. But all the other ones were related, although not all of them were significant. But as I said, we mainly wanted to look at how it interrelated with other issues. So this next one shows you one of the really interesting findings was that these risk factors had quite a different impact if they were particularly in the biological mothers. They had a much bigger impact than if they were in other adult members of the household. And in women, they seem to have a bigger impact than if they were in men. But it's so confusing because there's so many different types of household with different makeups that it was quite hard unpicking what was actually going on there. So we did a little bit of analysis just looking at the households with a single adult in, so that we could compare really see if it was the gender of the parent was making the difference. So this is another forest plot just using one analysis done with just the single women, or the households headed by a single woman, of which there was about 53,000, and then just the households headed by a single man, of which there was just under 5,000. And you can see that on the whole, these some of the differences aren't significant because of the small sample of single men. But on the whole, the green dots, which are the single women, are to the right of these black, well, it's actually very dark navy blue dots that represent the single men. So it seems to be having an impact even in single households. And you can see here for drug misuse, the the green dot isn't within the confidence of the black dot, and the black dot isn't within the confidence of the green dot. So there's a clear, significant difference in the impact of a drug misuse problem, even in single adult households, if it depending on the gender of the parent. The risk factor that was different was anxiety, which is having, as you can see, a significant impact on the likelihood of care if it's in men, but not if it's in single women. So that was very interesting. It does actually relate a bit to some of the qualitative evidence that's come through previously in children's social care, but not hadn't been found with quantitative evidence. That was quite important. Another one that I'll quickly show you is this little bit with ethnicity. Now, this was done at the child level, not at the household level. So and actually this was in Jean's presentation just now, generally what is found within Wales and in England, the same sort of issue, is that children from Black and mixed minoritized ethnic backgrounds are more likely to go into care than the majority white population, whereas children from Asian and other backgrounds are less likely than the majority population to go into care. And this is what I found when I had controlled for nothing, so with just the raw data. And then when we did a series of regression models and controlled for these parental risk factors, these are the findings. So the green dots are still the dots from the model controlling for nothing, and you will see they all move to the right here. And once we control for parental risk factors, which is quite an important, although not a very nice finding, that it kind of suggests that the reason that the Asian children were underrepresented in the care population might have been because their parents were less likely to have these factors, particularly alcohol and drug misuse was much less common in the population of children from Asian minoritized backgrounds. So I'm spending only 1 minute on each of the current projects. The Returning Home from Care project is something I'm doing at the moment. This is looking at children who return home to their parents, having been in care from a period of care placed outside their home. Sometimes children are technically in care, but with their parents. This is looking at people who've been out. I'm looking at the likelihood of children returning home. I'm looking at the likelihood of them remaining at home once they've returned home, or reaching a stage where they oscillate in and out of care, so go in and out of care. I'm looking again at whether that can in any way explain the changes in the number of children over time, because obviously if children stay in care for longer, that adds to the increased numbers of children in care. And there is certainly does seem to be some evidence that children are now staying in care for longer. And I'm also looking at the risk factors, again, the parental risk factors, similar to what I've just done, and some of the children's risk factors that are associated with the likelihood of, returning to care or returning, issues associated with returning and not returning, but using this wider family data that we have. And then finally, the project that I'm working on is a special guardianship orders project. I'm actually a co-I on this because there's another element to it happening in the School of Psychology in Cardiff University. But the sale-based part has got two main things. A special guardianship order, for those of you who don't know, it's something like it's where another person, it's often a family member, like a grandparent or an uncle or an aunt or someone, is given parental rights for a child. So it's a useful way of finding a solution for children who are in care and who can return to another family member but not their parents. So they've been around since 2005, but their use is increasing. So this particular project is looking at the circumstances in when they get given. It's a Nuffield funded project. So there's two parts to it. One is looking at which children receive an SGO according to their characteristics and their social care experience, and their school attendance is the other thing. And we're comparing to that to children in foster care who do not get an SGO. And then the other part of it, which we've actually done first, though we didn't plan to do it that way around, is to do with who becomes a special guardian and the households that those children are entering after leaving care. So it's looking at the age of the guardians and their relationship to children and the makeup of those households and the health conditions in the guardians. And that's partly because we suspect that, there's a lot of stress for uh, somebody taking on somebody else's, a family member's child, that those guardians may often be, older, or in a less, well, specifically older if they're grandparents. So it's more difficult looking after the children. Right. I think I've spent more than my time that I'm eligible to present. So I shall stop now, but you're very welcome to ask any questions. And that's my email address if anybody wants to email me after the presentation.